Welcome back to You're All Doomed, the podcast that is internet famous for going through the Friday the 13th movies 13 minutes at a time, but now we're going through the fan films. I am Brian.
And I'm Heavy Steppin' Greg.
And this episode, we are doing our first fan film sequel. We are doing Here Comes the Night Part 2. And I figured before we dive in to Part 2, we should kind of do a recap of Part 1 to kind of like refresh our memories of where we left off.
Yeah, as I remember it, it was a group of friends who were getting ready for some sort of birthday gathering or something in the woods, and one by one they are picked off by hockey mask wearing killers or killer. It was Jason, but then it turned out there was a gang of people wearing hockey masks that were also after them, and then Jason killed two of the hockey mask people, so it was like a weird Jason fan cult or something.
It was really weird, and I went back and listened to the episode where we covered the first one, and if you're listening to this and you haven't heard the first episode, I think it's a good idea to go back and listen to the Here Comes the Night episode before we get into Part 2. But yeah, I think where we ended up leaving off was we had a lot of questions, but we knew that there was a sequel, and so we were kind of forgiving some of the gray area, because we're like, all right, well, maybe they're just setting something up for the sequel, and we'll get our answers there. But yeah, there was, like you said, the kind of like gang of, Jason imposters or something at the end, and Megan, who was a girl that was supposed to be meeting up with these three people that we met at the beginning of Part 1. Megan seemed to kind of be the ringleader of this gang of Jasons, and there was also this really strange interaction where when the real Jason showed up at the end, it was almost like she was expecting him or waiting for him to arrive. And so we were wondering if they were, if Jason and Megan were kind of like teaming up or something, but then Jason quickly kills Megan, and we're like, all right, well then they weren't working together at all. And so we ended up walking out of that with questions, but we're like, all right, well, there's a Part 2. So we're going to, figure out, we're going to get all the answers to our questions, and we'll know exactly what's going on. And so that's where we are now. So we're up to Part 2.
And I feel like we are in exactly the same spot at the end of this movie, because there is a Part 3, and I come away with just as many, if not more, questions. So hopefully, eventually, we will get kind of a clear picture of exactly what story this is telling.
Yeah, as I was going through watching this, I was like, I think we're going to have the same kind of, excuse for the things that we don't understand. We're like, well, I guess we need to watch Part 3 to get those answers. So we'll get to Part 3 eventually, but yeah, there's definitely still questions.
This one starts off with sort of an audio flashback to Sarah, who was the last surviving person from the previous movie, but she was killed at the end, and Jason dragged her body through the woods. We pick up there. We see him dragging her body through continuing to drag her body through the woods, before we cut to three more friends, three new people sitting around a campfire, one of whom I think is Stephen Colbert.
Yeah. Yet again, it's a kind of a hodgepodge group of people where they kind of sort of seem to like each other, but not really, and so we don't really know why they're together. But so these three people, there's Davis, who's the one who looks like Stephen Colbert. There's Nick, who's the guy with the beard, and then the girl's name is Sam. And Nick, the bearded guy, is telling some weird story about like carrying a case of Natty Light and walking around with like a sixth grade math class sized boner or something. It's just some weird story just to kind of like set him up as the odd guy. And Davis is the one who hears something in the woods, and he wonders out loud if Megan and the rest of the group it has finally showed up. So we're like, okay, now there's this connection. These three people at this campfire were supposed to meet up with Megan and the three people from part one, but they're obviously oblivious to what's actually happened to that group.
And it's strange that they wouldn't have like one single meeting place. I don't like why this group of friends isn't at the same location that the other group from the first movie was hanging out and setting up camp in. I'm really confused by the relationships of this larger group that we are supposed to understand.
Yeah, that's true. I forgot that the original group from the part one had set something. They had set up a camp, and they'd pitched their tents and they had a campfire going, and it clearly was not the same location that these guys are. So yeah, it is a little weird. Like, if we were all meeting there, why wasn't there a more coordinated effort to go to the same place? Because right now they're just in the same woods, but it's like, why wouldn't they have gotten more specific about where they were going to meet up?
Right. After telling his story that didn't go anywhere, Nick leaves to drain the lizard and gets a machete in his tummy for his troubles.
One part I really liked about this scene was that as Nick was taking a leak, he has his like back turned to the woods, and Jason pops out of the woods, and he's still dragging Sarah by the feet, and he kind of like sees Nick and then realizes, oh, I need to change the focus my attention on someone else now. And so he just releases his grasp on Sarah's feet, and they just kind of go like thump. They just kind of like fall to the ground. So that was kind of funny.
Back at the campfire, the other two friends are roasting s'mores, and I think Jason wants one, so he approaches to help himself. But Davis, hears someone approaching and assumes it's Nick, so he reaches out his hand behind him to hand what he thinks is Nick, a s'more, but it's of course Jason. So his hand is crushed, and his arm is then hacked off. But the detail that I laughed at the hardest was that he just backhands the girl, smacking her to the ground basically, and then kicks Davis into the fire.
I noticed that too, because we don't really see Jason do a lot of like bitch slaps, but he was like, no, like I am focusing on Davis right now. I will get to you in a second. So just sit back, and I'm going to take care of you when I'm ready.
But as he's cooking Stephen Colbert over the campfire, we see her run away in the background. So she's escaped him for the moment.
So what are your thoughts on s'mores?
I'm not a huge fan. I don't love marshmallow. Graham crackers are certainly fine, and there's nothing wrong with melted chocolate, but they're not worth the effort that it takes.
I agree. I've never really gotten the appeal to it. I like all three ingredients, but I just feel like there's too many weird textures going on. Like, the graham cracker doesn't change consistency during this cooking process, right? Like, it's always going to be this like crunchy cracker. The chocolate rarely melts effectively, and so it's just this chocolate bar that's there. And then the marshmallow, like, that's fine. But you can very easily
goops it up.
Yeah, you can overdo it with the marshmallow, and it's not going to be as good. But I've never, my parents have a lake house, and when my parents' grandkids are there, and we'll hang out and make s'mores, and everyone gets really excited about it. I'm just like, I'm good. Like, I usually just eat marshmallows out of the bag, and maybe like grab one of the Hershey, chocolate bars. But I don't really see the appeal.
We might get some pushback from our fan base on this. This might be our most controversial stance yet.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, we're kind of coming out as anti-s'mores.
I think we're s'morephobes.
The pro s'more group could come at us.
Then we get the title card and opening credits. Nothing particularly jumped out at me, although the font and title treatment was nice looking and very, seemingly professional. And immediately take a shot, because we get a Camp Crystal Lake sign laying alongside the road as a car drives past.
I'll take another shot too, because there is a drone shot.
Double shot.
Yep. this car that's driving down the road has two dudes and two girls in it, and they're listening to some bitching heavy metal. Ted is the driver. The actor playing him is also the writer and director of the movie.
Okay.
Allison is the blonde in the back seat. Billy is the front seat passenger, and Susie is the brunette.
Who won't shut up?
Yeah. It seems like a really long car ride with those two in the back seat. So they're trying. The girls are trying to open up a wine bottle, but they can't find a corkscrew.
Ted forgot the corkscrew, which.
Oh yeah.
Hey Ted, where's the corkscrew?
Yeah, I didn't make that connection. I mean, I obviously familiar with the corkscrew, but I didn't do the Ted connection. So Ted takes his eyes off the road, trying to help them find the corkscrew in his bag in the back seat. And when he returns his focus back on the road, the girl from the opening campfire scene is standing in the road, and thwomp, she just gets completely plowed over.
And apparently kind of launched, because he and Billy get out of the car to see, if they hit something, and, they look around and they don't find her laying nearby. So she really got hurled out of their scope of vision.
Allison's reaction is pretty funny, because she says, and I quote, "Did we hit a little deer, like a little rabbit or something?" I'm like, well, those are two very different things. So it's pick one.
And how big is a baby, like a little rabbit? I mean,
yeah, I hardly think that you would even notice hitting a little rabbit, like a little deer maybe, but the way she just followed up little deer, like a little deer, like a little rabbit, like two different things.
They pretty much give up searching for whatever they hit and take off, leaving her for dead. But the saga of the wine bottle continues, because fortunately it's a screw top, so they were able to get it open, and Allison begins chugging the shit out of it. Back along the side of the road, the girl who escaped the campfire earlier is laying there and still alive but badly injured. But this has given Jason a chance to catch up, so he arrives and stomps on her head, crushing it to the ground, crushing it flat. And then he hits the road. He's going off after the car in slow motion.
The next scene, we're in some kind of it looks like an industrial parking lot, but I think we're led to believe they're on the outskirts of Camp Crystal Lake. But Allison, who we just saw chugging the wine earlier, is now barfing in the parking lot. And Billy, who is the front seat passenger, who has already established that he's a nurse, starts telling a story about when he was in med school. But nurses don't go to med school.
No, he said he was a resident. Ted called him a nurse, but Billy corrected him and said that he's a resident.
Oh, okay. Well then, my apologies, Billy.
Yeah, he's examining her barf quite a bit. He seems really fascinated by it, and it goes on a little too long.
What also goes on too long is Billy's story about barfing. It's the story from med school where it's something to do with drinking too much and eating fettuccine and barfing, and it's just kind of all over the place, and it just goes on for too long, and the girls are participating in the conversation too, but they're not. It's almost like they're not listening to him, because he clearly says it's fettuccine, but then one of the girls says something about spaghetti, and then another girl says something about the only way to eat Olive Garden is drunk, or while you're drunk. But Billy doesn't say anything about Olive Garden. He said they were at someone's house or whatever eating Italian food. So it's they're just all over the place and not really paying attention.
Yeah, it feels a little improv-y to me.
Yeah.
Ted realizes he forgot something back at the car, so he splits. And then Allie says, "Come on, guys, I know a shortcut, but why don't they just make that the way? Why? I don't understand how a shortcut would come up in this situation."
One quick little note to make, but before Ted goes to the car, he does look at his watch and kind of panics for a second, he's running late or something, and he sees what time it is, and he's like, "Oh shit, I got to go back to the car," and so he runs back to the car. So he's just seems a little distracted.
He makes it back to the car and roots around in the trunk. for I assume his stash of cocaine, because I think he grabs some stuff like a duffel bag and begins to head back in the direction that he was originally going, but pauses to take a bump. And this is when Jason shows up, and there's a really weird moment where Jason approaches, and the musical score is kind of building to this kind of standard horror movie crescendo, but then Ted thinks that he knows who this is. He thinks it's part of some plan, and he's like, oh, hey, you finally got here. And the music does this weird, like, sad trombone thing where it's Jason's kind of deflated because the guy isn't scared of him immediately.
Just going back real quick to the trunk of Ted's car, we see a copy of Drip Dry magazine, which is the same porno mag that the dude from part 1 had in his bag. And then there was also like a Milton Bradley Smurfs card game, and I looked it up because I was trying to figure out, like, why does he have this Smurfs card game in the back. And it says, the description said it's similar to the card game War, but instead of suits, the cards have specific characters that win over other characters. So Smurf takes Smurfette. I bet he does.
Jeez.
Yeah. Smurfette takes Papa. Papa takes Smurf, and Gargamel takes all of them. So it's a weird placement. I'm sure it's in there for a reason from like a filmmaker standpoint, but it was like, all right, you got this Smurfs card game back there. But I just thought that was worth pointing out.
What about Jokey Smurf?
He's always forgotten.
Ted pulls a hockey mask out of his duffel bag. It's kind of a replica of Roy's version of the hockey mask with blue accents on the cheeks, but he puts it on. So, I'm assuming now that he's part of the gang of Jason wannabes that Megan assembled at the end of the first movie.
The 3 other characters eventually find their way to the campfire that we saw in the opening scene, and they complain about the smell and that it smells like somebody burnt the hot dogs, but we know that the smell is Crispy Davis. Allison realizes something looks wrong with the campfire, so she walks a little bit closer, and that's when she sees the smoldering body of Davis laying in the fire.
Meanwhile, a watch alarm is going off incessantly, and the other 2 find that the watch is attached to the severed chunk of Davis's arm laying quite a distance away from the campfire. The watch then starts beeping faster, almost like it's going to detonate or something. It was really strange.
Well, I was also wondering why he would have his alarm set on this camping trip, unless, like that was when the rest of the group was supposed to show up or something, but it was just like, because it doesn't seem like this is too long after they got killed at the campsite. It's like, maybe within half an hour or something, because Davis is still on fire.
Yeah, that's interesting. Unless, like we said a minute ago, Ted checked his watch and realized he was late or something, and so I wonder if there was, like you say, a pre-arranged meeting time and Davis had his alarm set for that. Or was Davis also part of the hockey mask?
Oh, that's true.
Gang?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, let's come back to that, because there's something that comes up a little bit later that kind of clarifies people's roles in this plot.
They also find Sarah's body that Jason had kind of discarded when he killed Nick while he was peeing. And this commences a really long crying scene and everybody freaking out about Sarah being dead.
And this is when Ted rejoins the group, and they tried to tell him that something really bad has happened. And Ted tells everyone to stop being so dramatic. And when he finds out that Sarah is dead, he gets really angry and yells kind of like off into the air. He just is like, God damn it, you were supposed to stick to the fucking plan. And so now the rest of the group is like, Ted, like, what the hell's your problem? And that's when we see that Ted is now holding a butcher knife, and he puts on the hockey mask from before and says, time to die, Billy boy.
Yeah, he kind of goes full Stu from Scream at this point. Very Matthew Lillard. But He actually trips on his bag and falls, and gets his ass kicked by Allie, who tells the others to run, but a bunch of Polaroids have spilled out of Ted's bag, and she freaks off and then runs away too.
So this is where we kind of get some clarification on things. I did a screenshot of the Polaroids to kind of see what we were looking at. There's a Polaroid of Billy, and written underneath it, it says first. And then there's a Polaroid of a brunette, which I'm presuming is Susie, and under that it's written second. And then there's a picture of Susie, who is the girl from the opening campfire scene, and that says third. Nick, who is the bearded dude from the opening campfire scene, has a Polaroid, and under his picture it says "Make It Hurt." Davis, who, well, this kind of confirms that he was not part of the plan, because they had a picture of him and then the kind of instructions written underneath it just says, "Up to you." Like, do what you want. And then,
but maybe that means that he's in on it, and then also possibly unknowns to him, he's also a potential victim.
That could be, yeah, that could be. Let's see what happens with Davis, and then we'll decide what to do with him when the time comes, kind of thing. Okay, I like that. But then there's a picture of Sarah, and under her name it says last, or under her picture it says last. So the plan that Ted is mad about is that Sarah was supposed to be the last one killed. She was the blonde from the first movie that we saw Jason dragging. So yeah, so obviously whatever this plan is that Ted is, we know, involved in, it's kind of gone pear-shaped, and he's a little pissed off and doesn't know what to do.
Ted gets up off the ground, grabs his mask and a nearby axe, and staggers around the woods looking for the others, yelling like for Marco Polo, basically, which is my least favorite pool game. How do you feel about pool games, Brian?
Well, my funniest, or not funniest, but most interesting Marco Polo story is like growing up, you and I belonged to the same kind of like swimming pool, swim club, whatever you want to call it. And I was friends with two guys that are in the band The National. And we used to play Marco Polo all the time at the pool. And so like it's just kind of a funny connection, or it's like, yeah, I know those guys. I used to play Marco Polo with them, and now they're, playing to thousands of people on stage every night.
Do they have a song called Marco Polo in your honor?
I will have to check to see if there's a mention to it.
Allie's gang reaches the lake, where they scramble onto the dock and try to untie the canoe that's lashed there so that they can paddle for safety. But Ted is hot on their heels, and he's kind of riffing on the Freddy Krueger song. 1, 2, I'm coming for you. And I wondered like how far he was going to take that, but he kind of cuts it short.
It's a little muffled because he's off in the distance, and I was wondering, is he saying 1, 2, Ted is coming for you, or did he say Freddy? Like, was
he said like I'm coming for you, or someone's coming for you. He didn't name check Freddy, but I've never heard that song otherwise. Maybe there's like a real version of it, and the Nightmare on Elm Street just kind of modified it for their purposes, but I'd only ever heard it in context of Freddy Krueger before. So
there's this weird, like, the scene is kind of dark, so it's kind of hard to tell what they're doing. They're obviously trying to untie this canoe from the dock, but it's not really clear why it's so difficult. Maybe it's just like a really complicated knot or something, but they're really struggling with it. And then once Ted does show up at the dock, and again, like you mentioned, doing his best impression of Matthew Lillard, he starts to try to justify the murders, which we often see in movies like this, where it's like, hey, before I'm going to kill you, I'm going to explain.
Yeah, he starts monologuing a little bit and basically like reveals, well, people die all the time without any reason. Now we have a reason, and that's I guess sort of supposed to explain the nihilistic approach of this gang of Jason wannabes or something.
But what's the reason?
Right.
Well, we'll have to tune into part 3 to figure out. But Yeah, we don't really get any clarification here. It's just, he's going into full psycho mode, and he's like, Billy's just as confused as I am, and he's like, you don't have to do this, man. And Ted puts on the hockey mask, and he's like, sorry, man, it's already done. And this was done pretty well, I thought, where it's kind of like some close-up shots, and you're expecting Ted to be the one that's stabbing Billy, because you hear some like, stabbing sounds, and then I think Billy even kind of like screams or something. But what is actually happening is a machete is going through Ted's chest, and that's because Jason is standing behind him on the dock.
I mean, he was absolutely destroyed from behind. And Jason seemed a little further away than I thought, so I wonder if he threw the machete.
It was weird because Ted falls to the ground, and then all you see is kind of like this foggy dock, and then Jason emerges from the fog. So you're right, like he was not standing right behind Ted, not close enough to just stab him with the machete. So it's like, yeah, I don't know if he threw it or if it was just kind of, a weird cut where they tried to make it seem like he was close and he wasn't. Like, I don't know. It just
it was a little muddled.
Yeah.
And then Jason, advances along the dock, but he's going one board at a time, almost like he's trying to avoid breaking his mother's back by stepping on a crack. But she's already beheaded, so who cares if her back is broken? This is giving them all time to make it into the canoe, and they furiously start paddling away.
Somehow the Polaroids from earlier, which were all scattered on the ground, have found their way into the canoe. I think, if I'm not mistaken, when Allison kicks the dirt in Ted's face earlier and they're able to escape, I think I saw her like reach down and grab the bag, Ted's bag, but the Polaroids wouldn't have been in it because we saw them all scattered on the ground. But somehow they're in the canoe, and Allison picks up the photo of Billy, which says first underneath, and suddenly like the expression on her face changes from like terror to I need to complete my mission or something. Like there's this weird kind of...
There's a shift.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I having watched the first one and knowing that there was, betrayals afoot in this story, I was always kind of keeping my eye on her. So I didn't fully trust her, especially with how much she was crying when they found Sarah's body. So I feel like she may be a threat for part 3 in some way.
Yeah, but I mean, she and her picture was not included in the pile of Polaroids, so she was not mentioned as one of the planned victims. But she was the one that kicked the dirt in Ted's face so they could run away.
Right.
So it's like, why not flip the switch there?
Yeah.
But maybe it was just kind of like the backup plan. Like, hey, if Ted can't complete his mission, then you've got this rogue agent in Allison who's going to activate when necessary. Because at first I was like, well, that's just a cheap twist. But then when I went back and looked at the Polaroids, I'm like, all right, well, that's fair. Like, she wasn't part of the original victim list. So, like, okay, if she's, this rogue agent, then yeah, it does appear that, I mean, I guess she's as far as we know, she's the only surviving member of this crew of Jasons, right?
Right. At this point, yes. I mean, I almost wonder if this Jason group, it's like a competition among them, and they may not even all know who else is involved in the competition. And that might be why Davis was marked as a, like, see how it goes, like, because Ted may not have known that Davis was part of the plan, or vice versa, and none of them may have known that if in fact Allie is part of this plan, that she's in on it. I don't know. I feel like there's layers of betrayal going on here, even within the group of killers.
Yeah, and what we definitely don't know is there's no motivation yet, other than it's potentially, and we kind of hinted at this in the first episode, is like kind of like a Stranger's thing, not Stranger Things, but like the movie The Strangers, where when the victims of the home invasion ask the killers why they're doing this, and their answer was like, because you were home, like, like they were just bored and they had nothing else to do. And so if that's the motivation, fine. And it does kind of track that maybe they don't know everyone that's part of the crew, because when Ted is confronted by real Jason, he doesn't really make an attempt to kind of figure out who it is.
Mm-hmm.
So like if he knew that the 5 people that were in the group, he would be like, Johnny, is that you? Or
Right.
like there was none of that. It was like, oh, you look great. Like you must be part of this group. I don't know who you are, but you have a great costume. So we don't yet know the motivations of this group. All we know is that their plans have been screwed up because Jason is there. But the questions that I have too is like, I don't understand the connections of them dressing up as Jason to do this.
Right.
And I don't know if that's going to get explained. Because they haven't really established themselves as some like Jason Voorhees fan club or something where they're going to continue, Jason's mission. It's really,
And
like,
only,
I'm more confused than I was after the first one.
Yeah, and only Megan seems to have expected Jason to show up, or like know that was a possibility. So yeah, I really don't understand what the Jason cosplay has to do with anything.
That's right. I forgot about. Yeah, that was a big part of part 1 where Megan, when Jason does show up and Megan sees him, there's no look of alarm. It's just like, it's almost like she was expecting him to see her.
Yeah.
And then he ended up killing her. But yeah, it's weird. And I'll just throw this out to you now. We can kind of decide, even off mic, how you want to handle it. But like, I almost just want to jump ahead to part 3 and kind of like get the answer and then talk about it rather than wait, because at this point we've got 5 or 6 more movies in between. But I can go either way. But I'm just assuming it's going to be a trilogy. Like, who knows? Like, we may watch the 3rd one and we find out that there's, it's going to be a 7-part series or something. But at this point, I'm like, all right, I just want answers. Like, I don't know if I want to wait much longer.
Right. To the extent that I care. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I'm with you. We get a little mid-credits stinger of Jason walking off the dock and into a smoke machine, and then a little kind of ending title card that says, "And the dawn approaches."
Which makes me wonder if there's like another girl named Dawn who's like part of the group, and like she's literally approaching. But yeah, we can kind of guess or make some guesses about what the 3rd one is going to do. When they talk about the dawn approaching, I'm assuming it's literal, that the sun is about to rise. But I just don't know what the end game is here, because there's no one after them. Like, there's no investigation going on about why these people are dying. So like, they're kind of like operating independently in the woods. This is happening. So at least at the end of part 2, we've got Allison in the boat with Billy and Susie. We don't know if she's going to kill them, probably. But then we've got the X factor of Jason, who's still out there, who doesn't give a shit about any of them.
Right.
So
And
who wins? Like, probably Jason, but
right, to whatever extent winning is part of it. Yeah. And then we've got to obviously wait for Dawn to come all the way from Slough.
Right. So yeah, I think we've made like our feelings about it pretty clear. Like, it's just kind of like that middle chapter in a trilogy where I just don't feel like it pushed the story forward enough. I was hoping for, there were twists in this, but like, I'm just more confused, and I don't know if that's a great place to be heading into possibly the last chapter of this trilogy. I have no idea, but there was not a lot of clarity, and I just don't know what the point is, and I'm also like, I don't even know if there is an answer that I would be satisfied with. Like, if they're just this weird group of people that are mimicking Jason, but even that, like, even just saying that out loud, I don't think that's true, because in the first one, remember there was that whole scene at the end where it was like the two guys with Megan, and the two guys were shocked that people were killed.
Right.
And so why were they there to begin with then? Because Megan was definitely in on the killing.
Yeah.
I think we even, figured out that she might have even been one of the Jasons that we saw doing, at least one of the kills in the first one, along with real Jason. But then, like, those other two people that were dressed up as Jason seemed shocked that there was this act of violence committed. So it's like, well, then what are they doing?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm interested enough that, like, there's a chance I'll wind up enjoying this little mini series of fan films if the third part, or whenever the final part of this trilogy, of this series happens, whether or not it satisfies any sort of curiosity that I have about what's going on here. And if it does, I'll wind up being like, oh, well, it was cool, and I liked that they kind of unfolded things slowly, but I'm not positive that's going to happen.
That's what I'm afraid of. Yeah. It's like, it's just frustrating right now because I want to know what's going on, and I don't really have I can't even like go in a direction to predict where it's going, because I just don't know, because there's just too many confusing elements to it. But yeah, it's weird. I do like both of these movies. I think they look really good. I just think from a story standpoint, this one didn't take us anywhere different. Even the characters kind of felt exactly the same as the first one. So there's just the unanswered questions that we got to figure out, because Megan and Sarah were friends, and at least in the first one it was established they were friends. So then why is Megan killing Sarah? And we may never know that, because Megan's dead, Sarah's dead. So I don't know even how they're going to wrap this up.
Yeah. The only real criticism that I have is, and I remember this bugging me in the first one too, Jason's footsteps are way too loud. It's ridiculously distracting, and also makes it less scary because you hear him coming from a mile away. He's thumping around like Frankenstein.
Yeah. Another thing I didn't like is there were way too many like head tilts. I think that's something that's being exploited a little bit too much in horror movies, where, it's like, oh my God, look how creepy it is. He just like tilted his head as he's trying to like comprehend what's going on or whatever. It's like, you do that once and it's cool, but like, I feel like there was 3 or 4 times that he was tilting his head, having a conversation with Ted, after he killed Ted, after they got away on the canoe, and it's like, all right, we get it, he's tilting his head, and I know he's wearing a mask, so you have to express some sort of like emotion or curiosity, but yeah, just like, all right, no more head tilts.
Agreed.
All right, so we will figure out when we're going to get to Here Comes the Night 3 later, but what we do know is the next episode is going to be Roseblood, which I'm particularly interested in, other than the fact that it's a feature-length movie, like 95 minutes or something like that. But this is, at least as far as I'm told, a direct continuation to Part 7, The New Blood, which is not really something I thought I would ever want or need, but
we're gonna get.
Yeah, but we're gonna get it, and so we'll sit down and talk about that one. So if you're interested in hearing my recipe for s'mores that substitutes Reese's peanut butter cups for marshmallows, then oh shit, I just told you the fucking recipe. Oh. All right, well, just tune in next time for the next episode of You're All Doomed.